In this episode, we are going to learn how to get and maintain a good credit score, how to fix a bad one, and why they matter for people wanting to borrow money to buy a home.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to move it along and become homeowners. But most importantly, it is for you to become an educated home buyer.
I'm Megan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum. But it's a good thing because between us we've got over 45 years experience to share with you and bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure you get unbiased and real information you can rely on. Allow us to guide you on your home buying journey. We want you to become an educated home buyer so that you can stop looking for your first home and actually become a proud homeowner.
We've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au, and there you'll get access to our free mini course, How to Price a Property Like a Professional. You will also find the holy grail of home buying education, Your First Home Buyer Guide, the online course for people who want to become educated home buyers. We created this for you to help you get on the right path to home ownership for your first home and beyond.
But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, we've got the boring bit, the disclaimer. You of course know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording. Things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority and your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today we're talking all about credit scores, and we have a guest, Kevin James, who is the General Manager Advisory and Solutions at Equifax. And we've been told he could talk all day on this topic. So we have... I love an expert in their field. So welcome, Kevin. We're very excited that you've decided to come along and help us all learn about credit scores, because I can tell you that Megan and I don't know much about this at all.
Really don't. In fact, I didn't even know that I could go to Equifax and get a credit score. We have used Equifax for tenant checking in the past.
Yes. Yep.
No. There you go.
So, I think there's a couple of elements that form part of a credit score, right? And I think the industry on its own has evolved. And you'll hear people talking about negative credit scores and positive credit scores. And the end of the day, what that actually means is that, in 2018, they started with a comprehensive credit reporting. And basically what that means is anybody who has a loan, the repayment history is reported to the bureaus. So if you are up to date, if you're 30 days, if you're 90 days, that is reported, right? And so I think those that have loans today, you see that those that pay well, their credit scores are certainly positively impacted as a result of that. And those that are slow payers, there's a negative impact on that because it forms part of the score on your behaviour. So there is
Let me ask a really simple question. Sorry, what's it out of? Like, is it out of 1,000 or what does a credit score actually look like?
So there's from Equifax, we calibrate it from 1 to 1,200. And basically there's a calibration there that is worked out that the lower the score, the more likely for the person to default within a 12-month period. So that's basically what it means. So the better your score, the less likely you are to achieve 90 days delinquent on a loan in the next 12 months.
So it's a risk factor, like it's a risk score. Would you say that's... If I said to you, what exactly is a credit score? How do you define it?
It would be a risk score, right? It's taking a number of attributes and it builds a persona of that individual and puts you into a like-for-like bucket with those that have performed like that in the past.
Does everybody have one? Like the minute you get your first credit card, is that sort of start the process of you getting a credit score?
So you don't know that you've got one. It's just there and you're being assessed based on your spend or keeping up with bills behaviour.
Absolutely. So there's a number of things that, create positive impacts to your credit score. There's a number of things that have adverse impacts. And so, we spoke a little bit earlier about if your payment history and the way you pay is good, that's going to positively impact your score. And that, regardless of what that type of loan is, that shows good behavior. It shows your willingness to pay and ability to pay. And that will absolutely help. So, a lot of people will say, oh, is a credit card actually helping get a score or not get a score? It absolutely does, because that is now with positive, when you pay your credit card on time and everything's up to date, that's value add in what you are building in your credit score, right? And so I think the message would be that if you do have lending, be very vigilant on your lending, be very open and honest on your lending, because, at the end of the day, all of these attributes on a monthly basis form part and parcel of where you are going. And, the other thing that is, that plays quite strongly into your credit score is your behavior of lending. The more aggressive you are in lending, if you've got a, credit card application this month, a credit card application next month, right? That actually plays adversely into the credit file. And the logic behind it is, the more loans you're taking and the more propensity or the opportunity for you to be bad is there, right? And so a busy file is definitely not helpful in terms of a lender assessing somebody who's had 5 loans or 5 applications in the last 5 months.
So I want to
Interesting.
tease this out for a little bit.
Many questions.
Yeah, and so first of all, we get a credit score as soon as we start acquiring debt or borrowing money in whatever form. So it could be credit card right up to a home loan.
Is it also bills? Sorry, can I add to that?
Yeah.
Is it also like your telephone bills and things like that?
The initial telco and utility will start your file. Yeah, it definitely does start the file, and it'll start your attributes. And that's a positive, right? Because you're not new to bureau. So you seek an inquiry when they know who you are. And so they can add more attributes and more benefits to who you are because they know who you are, right? So, new to country is a bit more challenging because it's your first inquiry. It's very difficult to actually put you in a persona when all we know is this first inquiry. So, inquiry is not a bad thing. So if you are one of those fortunate people that paid your mortgage off and you've never done an inquiry for 15 years, when you come back in, you're almost starting as a new entrant into the market, right? So, touching your credit file and actually being part of society and the normal economic cycles of it absolutely is valuable. I think the challenge comes as where you are a busy borrower, then it starts to work a little bit against you.
So the idea being like a cash buyer of everything. Everything's not going to develop a credit score. And then when they go to borrow money for a house, they're going to be behind the 8 ball. So you've got to show that you're responsible with credit by the sounds of it. A question on that. So I was curious about the bills. That was one of my questions too, Megan. And the other question I've got is that if you got a credit card, when you get the end of your month and you get your statement, you can either pay the minimum payment or you can pay the complete bill. Do you get better points for paying it off in its entirety versus the minimum payment, or is it all the same?
Yeah, it's all the same. So as long as you are keeping up to your contracted obligations, you will get the same benefit as overpaying. I guess it's got financial benefits of obviously paying the whole balance, and is a different conversation.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about your credit scores by overpaying it, as long as it's the credit scores are really based around the obligations to your lender, and you achieving those obligations is good.
What about Afterpay? Seems to be a popular way for people to, more than they can afford at one point in time.
Yeah, so there's a lot of debate around the buy now pay later, and whether that's a credit contract or whether it's not. And there's a bit of a regulation that's about to pass, and that they're working on it. I think the way we view that is anything over the $3,000 mark, we would look at that. but there is no positive reporting on any of the bond. Afterpay you asked about. On Afterpay, we have no positive reporting in Australia. So in other words, if you do pay your $100 over the next 4 weeks, or you adhere to your contract, we are not in a position to actually add anything to your credit score by your Afterpays.
So don't use it to get a better credit score. And, you got to be very good at paying it off if you do use it.
Yep.
So from a lender's point of view, let's think about a first home buyer. Why do they need to be aware of credit scores? And at what point might they find out that they've actually got a negative credit score?
I think, being vigilant and knowing what your credit score is definitely, and understanding the dynamics of what adds to your credit score and what doesn't add to your credit score is definitely important, because there are cutoffs, and there will be an application, it runs through a score, and if it doesn't hit those thresholds, then you tend to get that dropout of, sorry, we can't help you, right? So I think being vigilant on and understanding your credit score and actually understanding the dynamics of your credit score is very, very helpful, because as you start to save, as you start to do all those right things and your score goes up, then, I think you get through the threshold, which then gives you the opportunity to show your income and show your expenses and show all of that kind of, the actual dynamics of achieving the loan. I think where you punish your score, or your score is very low, you struggle to get through the threshold of actually being able to present all the other information for that, contract.
How do you find out what your credit score is?
So, you're entitled in Australia to a free credit report. From an Equifax point of view, if you go to equifax.com, you can go on there and you can actually get a free credit report. And there's a certain number that you're entitled to every year. But it's definitely worth doing it because it is free. And it was, it mandated as part of the comprehensive credit reporting where, people are entitled to actually have a look and see what it is. And, it's quite clear that, once you start getting sort of between the 750s and the 800s on your score, you're sort of starting to get in that persona of the, the mortgage world. And then, your autos, your credit cards will accept slightly lower, and, all different lenders have different thresholds of what they will do. But, when you're getting sort of to that 750 from an Equifax, which is calibrated at 1200, you're starting to get in that persona of where your lenders would look at mortgages.
So are they all different? Is there essential housing for the score and you're just tapping into a national database, or do you have a score and then the mortgage, the lenders sort of go, oh, okay, well, according to Equifax, this is your score, and there might be other providers of a score?
Well, there is variations. Absolutely, there's variations, and there's other bureaus that have their scores as well. But, we work with all the major lenders. We're, a tier 1 bureau with all of the big 4 banks. And certainly they have policy rules, but they lean on the score too, right? So they do use our positive scores. And then, if it's X, then they may have a policy rule that asks for Y, or, but it initially starts with what is the actual score. And that even, from a broker point of view, and the 8 main aggregators, whatever it is, 13,000 brokers, right? They will do what they call a score seeker or an access seeker on behalf of that borrower. And they'll have a look at that score, and they'll have a look at those liabilities, and then they will work out where they best fit and place, because there's some that will take a higher risk population than others. And so your brokers are very good at understanding what the customer's requirements look like. But the score is a very important part of that initial step of who do I go with, and, how much can I tend to ask for here.
It's really interesting, and I have no doubt that a number of our listeners probably jumped straight online and did that credit report.
I want to do it myself right now because I want to too.
I'm dying to know what my credit score is now. Hasn't been something I've thought about really. But what are the sorts of things that people, let's say they've jumped on, they've had a look, and their score is 420.
Yeah.
That would probably compare to what you talked about as maybe that sort of, okayish kind of level around that 750. That sounds a bit low. If you get a bad score, how would that have happened to them? What would
How'd you get
have
it?
been the things?
What
Get a
have
bad
you done? What haven't you done?
There could be a number of things that impact that. If it's maybe you do have some lending that has been a little bit challenging for you, and as a result, you sort of lazy payer, late payer, and that's feeding through, and it actually impacts you. The other one could be that you're actually a little bit busy on the credit file, and you get personal loans and all these types of things that are running around. But I think that one of the things that for the listeners to understand is, in the Australian regime, there's a hardship process, right? And what that does is a lot of people say hardship and they tend to get a little bit sort of upbeat about that because it's hardship. What it does is it actually starts to mask and freeze all of the attributes that would impact your score. So it's a good thing when it comes to your score to admit that you have some challenges
Okay.
and work with your lender, because it won't show that you are now overdue and starting to work against you. And it actually will say that you have some hardship, and and you're working together on that. And it actually doesn't impact on any of your scores, and it keeps you at a static position and allows you to work with that lender until you can get yourself back on your feet and in the right position. So I think the call up being is don't leave it too late. Most people have hardship programs. They absolutely will work with you. The regulators are very much tied to, lenders being responsible lenders, and they are doing what they can to do that. So the core being, if you do have a bit of challenge, then it's definitely worth talking with your provider to hold your score where it is, and potentially it starts to pick itself back up again rather than leaving it until you get too much adverse on your file that impacts your score.
Because I have heard stories about, people that, 5 years earlier, 6, 7 years earlier, they've missed a payment on a credit card, or they missed a bill, Telstra bill or something like that. And that's basically been like a drag on their credit score ever since. And they've been completely unaware of it. And I guess it's a little bit of hygiene, isn't it? Personal finance hygiene here that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I'm guessing you get a good one just by paying your bills on time and just continuing to do that and just being a good sort of financial citizen. But how do you repair a bad credit score?
So I think it's those kind of things, so if you do have a challenge, then, to put it in the easiest way is to stop the rot on terms of the data flowing through, right? And make sure that everyone understands that there's a challenge here. You've fessed into this challenge and you're working with your lender. The second one is when you recover, it's a lot easier to recover a score now than what it would have been, pre-2018. So to your point earlier, if somebody got some default on some bill because they were renting and left and stuff, that would sit there for a 5-year period and then it would drop off. And there was no good behavior coming in because they didn't see that credit card payment. They didn't see the personal loan being paid. They didn't see the auto every month being paid, right? So, in today's environment, it's much easier to repair your score by getting yourself back on your feet. And every month there's a value being added to your credit score and your behavior, opposed to the last interaction that you ever had with the bureau. It's an automatic
Sort of building on top.
Absolutely. So it's a dynamic bureau today, whereas it used to be a little bit static, and we'd only hear from a person if they were going to do an inquiry or they'd had an adverse event.
Yeah.
Whereas today we actually have all the good events too, which then helps you to repair.
So are there things that you can do to rapidly repair a credit score?
I think it's
Or do you have to let it time just
I think it's your behavior and the data that feeds in is going to repair it. So time is definitely one of those things, depending on what you have and how much you have. The other one is, like I said earlier, is like, if you are repairing and you are trying to get better, the worst thing you can do is go borrow some more. Do you know what I mean? Because then you start to get some adverse and, the heavy stuff as well. So I think is that, if you have had some challenges, you are getting back on your feet, is give yourself the right time and manage what you have on your plate and let it come together without adding any additional negatives to your score.
What about where it's just been one of those accidental things, and in fact, you do manage your money well, and you're a good saver, and generally speaking, you pay your bills on time, and your credit card is paid off, but you've missed a couple of payments due date, and that's racked up some negatives on your credit score. What could a person who is in financial control but has just been a bit forgetful, what could they do to, I'm thinking, do you get a credit card and just, spend the odd bit and make sure you're paying it off well in advance of the due date? Is that the sort of thing you could do?
Oh, I think it's
I know you can't give advice, but
yeah. I think, at the end of the day, I think we would be talking that the impact's probably more greater than 90 days.
right?
Within the 0 to 90 days, there's, lazy payers and went on holidays and stuff coming through.
I'm just not overdue.
Yes, yeah. So it normally, from a behavior point of view, post the 90 days, we know you would have had letters, you'd have phone calls and all of that and stuff, and it's still there. So, the credit score on a lazy payer within the 30-day period of when it was meant to be is not going to fall down, and it's probably not going to rise on its own, but it's certainly not going to, impact you dramatically that it would stop you lending. I think it's that post 90 days, I would urge people to be a bit careful on that because it starts to impact.
Now, it's quite interesting because you talk a bit about the applications and how that can be adverse. And I've heard this from a lot of people, and brokers will even say it, be careful how many applications that you actually lodge for loans. And this is one of the reasons why we recommend people use a broker as well, because, on your own, you could go to all these different banks and actually lodge applications and inadvertently screw yourself up. But I guess each time you apply for a credit card, then that adversely impacts. And then I guess there's a period of time, so that might take a knock, and then potentially takes time for you to just show that you can pay it off before it starts being positive. I mean, how does it actually work?
Yeah. So you're right. So if there was 4 credit cards in 4 months, then that's not going to do you proud, right? But if you think of somebody who hasn't had anything for 36 months, who then applies for a credit card, that actually adds to your credit file because they still know you're in Australia, they still know you're around, you're still part of society. So it's not a blunt instrument that says if you apply for a credit card, then that's negative and then you need to make the payment so that you get positive.
Right.
Depending on the circumstance of if you're not a busy borrower and you actually then show that you're in Australia and you're in society, that actually adds to your credit score. And then obviously you still got to do the right things on your payments. But it's not really a blunt instrument that says if you apply for a credit card, you get negative and then you get yourself positives. In some instances, the inquiry and the repayments are positive for you. It's the busy file. I would urge your listeners to be careful being a busy file. Just be a natural citizen is probably the message.
So how long does it take? So somebody's finished school or uni, right? They get their first credit card. That's their first debt, right? Maybe they move out of home. Maybe they get a couple of utility bills or whatever. And does it start at 0 and work up, or is this a assumed midpoint that it starts at, and you lose or you gain? I mean, how does it work?
I think again, it sort of it'll be in that midpoint, right? Because there's no adverse to it, but there's not a lot on it. So there's a midpoint to it. And then it will have a look at the dynamics of what you've applied for. Was it an iPhone at the telco? Was it a, Toyota? And then it'll work it out from there. But it invariably it's going to be you sort of your midpoint. So if I had to take a guess, it's going to be your 450 to 700 ish, because there's not too much that it can actually work on, but it takes the thought pattern of that persona of a young person.
Is AI used for this? Sorry, I just was curious to know, when you say it takes a persona, is that, it sounds like it's got a life all of its own, this credit score thing.
Yeah. No, it's built. There's AI that's been used to build the scores and to understand what it needs to be, but they are totally explainable. And so the difference, you'll hear AI being talked, and one of the things that we can say is that it's all explainable AI. It's not, there's no non-explainable stuff in there. So if somebody said to us, why was I declined, we could actually go and have a look and see where the negatives were versus the positives. So it is totally explainable, those credit scores. And they're not, machines talking to machines to come up with what it is.
You're saying that there is a method there that is above board, and it's easy to see it. There is a little bit of a cultural thing happening at the moment where parents are continuing to pay their kids' mobile phone, their kids' internet. They're giving them an extra card on their credit card. I'm starting to understand from you that could be quite really take away the benefit of the child, adult child building their own credit score. Would that be a fair thing to say?
If the card was in the parents' names and the plastic's been handed over, then 100%. They're not seeing the positive or the value adds of being in the Australian society and working through it. That would just purely be adding to mum and dad. Yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting one to reflect on, all of you that are getting your bills paid by mum and dad.
Yeah, but also your kids could actually stuff up your credit score if they're not good at paying their if it's on your account. I'm actually interested about the privacy aspect here, because obviously Equifax and other houses, or I don't know what you call these institutions, shall we say, other institutions obviously have a huge amount of information on individuals, and it's not aggregated, it's not anonymized. This is specific, because if I can go in there and get my own score, so you must have it. I think there's Illion's another company, right? There's a number of other companies out there. So I don't know, what are you governed by? How do I know that other people can't get access to that?
Yeah, so we are heavily, heavily governed in what's called personally identified information. And at a global level, we are extremely governed. And we'll spend circa $1 billion a year on cybersecurity and everything else because of the PII elements. And then we also, from a staff point of view, from a coaching training point of view, from a hierarchy of what you can touch and what you can't touch in the bureau, is very, very strict, because that is our lifeline.
Yeah, I have learnt so much today, Kevin. And I definitely agree, you can talk about this subject.
Now, I do have a couple more questions though. I got on the Money Smart website, and Money Smart says don't pay anybody to fix your credit score. And so why would they say that? And are there scammers out there trying to basically get people who've managed to get themselves into trouble, sort of pay them to promise them a lifeline?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there will be, right? There's predatory people all over the place. I think, if I had to look at it from a messaging point of view, things happen in life. There are events that happen and cause hardship. And can you prescribe what is hardship? Probably not, because there's an event that can happen all over the place. The message there, I would say, is I don't think you need to pay anybody to sort that out. Speak with your lender. There is, rigor in place. There's lots of things that lenders are willing to help you. The regulators are certainly scrutinizing it to make sure that that is the case. I think the other part of it is if it's not an event, right, and it's overcommitment, then, there are very real legitimate organizations out there that will work with you to help you to work out how you're going to work through your debt profiles, and they will talk with lenders and they will negotiate on your behalf where it is maybe a literacy thing. But there is definitely registered advisors out there and industry experts. I don't believe that, there's anyone that you're paying somebody. Maybe that's a choice point, but there are definitely people that are out there to help.
Should it like money counselors and financial counselors? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, those are legitimate people that will help. They will work with us or work with the lenders. There's a number of different institutions that will help. And like I say, there's a variation between overcommitment and hardship events.
Yeah.
So would it be fair? Would it be fair to say that, in that circumstance, what you're doing is actually improving yourself as, a good financial citizen, and as opposed to somebody coming in and saying, promising to, I'll take your score from 350 to 750, just give me 2 months, which is not you working on yourself and your behaviours. It's someone maybe over-promising that they can do something in the background to that algorithm.
Yeah, there's no, like I say, if there is any form of, borrowing that wasn't you and all of that, there's mechanisms for all of that kind of complaint mechanisms through the lenders, through, a number of things. And those all flow back to where it needs to and touch all the points that it needs to get to. So I think if you are engaging with your lender and, maybe somebody use your name or whatever that looks like, there's definitely a mechanism that the lender will contact the bureau will rectify it, so there's, or financial counselors will help and, things will be rectified. But there is like I say, there's also a variation between an incident and hardship. Yes, overcommitment, and the two variations is normally with a hardship on an event. You sort of within 6 months, if you give breathing space and you can work things out and maybe somebody gets the job again, then that works its way out. Whereas overcommitment's probably a little bit longer term and need to refinance, reschedule, redo things over the life of those loans because nothing's going to change.
Yeah, and probably some more education around actually financial literacy and behaviours. I would, in the show notes, we'll put the link to Equifax so you can actually go in and check your credit score, but also we'll put a link to that Money Smart article that I was reading on this. This is really fascinating stuff because, it is talked about a lot and we were chatting about what topics we need to do on the podcast. We thought we haven't actually done credit scores. We don't even know much about them. So that's been really fascinating. We do have a guest question for every guest, right? And it's sort of going back to when you were a first home buyer. We would love to know, what is the one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were a first home buyer?
That if you actually do get a credit card and behave with your credit card, it actually adds value to when you want to buy your house. Or if you go and get a mobile phone and you do a plan, it adds value, right? Whereas before, when everything was save, don't borrow, don't do this.
But pay cash.
Yeah. And give my age away. But, the end of the day, it's like that does not add value because you actually look like new to country when you actually apply for your mortgage because you have not touched any bureau. No one knows who you are really, right? So I think it's not as negative as what it may have been. And with positive reporting now in Australia and, every month you get your payments posted, it still will add some value. Don't be busy.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because as you were talking about new to country, as if someone just flew into Australia, has no history here, and tenants have that problem. Like actual immigrants do have that problem in terms of finding a rental property and getting references for a rental property. So in some ways, it's just a little bit similar, that you've got to prove your worth as a potential tenant, prove your worth as a potential borrower. There's history and a track record, I guess, is so important. It doesn't matter where you're going to live, whether you're renting or whether you're buying the property.
Yes.
Quite fascinating. All right, well, Kevin, that's been a really fascinating chat. Do you have any final questions, Megan?
I was just reflecting, and I think, the thing that I've really come away from this discussion with is that you can actually, and I'm going to use the word manipulate, but you can actually create your own future if you are educated about what goes into a credit score and how you can positively impact that. So you actually can build that yourself. If you know all of this information, plus there's a lot more, no doubt. But, this information I think is incredibly valuable to people who are perhaps in 12 months' time thinking about their first home, they're saving their deposit. There are some real tangible aspects of behaviour that they can put into place now that can really help to build that credit score in a positive way, using some of the things that you've talked about and understanding how they can actually make that happen. I think that's incredibly valuable to first-home buyers. Thank you for sharing.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me.
And for listeners, have you joined our Facebook group yet? It's called Your First Home Buyer Guide Australia, and it's your opportunity to connect with us and ask us your questions. Ask us your credit score questions. We'll send them to the experts. And you get answers from experts in that Facebook group, not from other. It's not the blind leading the blind. You're not going to be led down the garden path. So it's in our wheelhouse. We will answer them. And when it's not, we will actually seek to get those answers from the relevant experts.
Yeah. Quick note, you might think that we cover everything you need to know in these podcasts, but a word of warning, we don't. We just scratch the surface here. If you really want to be an educated first home buyer, you need to learn all of the steps and how to do everything in the right order.
And it only costs you $990 to do our course, which is for Your First Home Buyer Guide. And you get direct access to us to help guide you through your negotiations. You can actually, every Wednesday we do a campfire and you can share the link of any property you're thinking about buying. We can help you work through that process of, is it A, B, C grade or total no-go zone? And trust me, you will buy better with our guidance, and you'll overpay by a hell of a lot more than $1,000 if you don't know what you're doing.
In this episode, we've only touched on a tiny part of the huge amount of things you need to know to become an educated first home buyer. There is so much more for you to do. You can learn all of the steps in the right order and avoid all of the mistakes that others have made in our 10-step online course for first home buyers.
If you'd like to learn more about the right process and avoid making rookie errors, become an educated home buyer. Head over to the website, check out Your First Home Buyer Guide, the course that we have created for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. It helps other people find us. And of course, I know it's a bit cringy, but we're going to ask for 5 stars. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you've found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with more priceless stuff.